The Hells Angels biker pulled the little girl from a sunken feed house, and her hope restarted his abandoned heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. On a cold, rainy evening, as the last light of day faded over the horizon, a Hells Angels biker named Marcus Steel Thompson was cruising down an empty road. His motorcycle roared through the wet streets, the sound of its engine a familiar comfort. Marcus had been through countless battles, both on and off the road, and his leather jacket, marked with the Hells Angels patches, told a story of a life full of grit and struggle. But tonight, something felt different. As he leaned into a sharp curve, something caught his attention. Faint cries, barely audible, drifting through the howling wind. His instincts, honed over years of riding through the toughest terrains, kicked in. He slowed down, looking around, and there it was, a small, dilapidated feed house half submerged in the rising waters of a storm. The cries were coming from inside. Without thinking, he guided his motorcycle toward the house, the engine cutting through the rain like a blade. As he approached, he saw a shadowy figure, a little girl, no older than 6, trapped in the flood. The feed house had collapsed on one side, leaving her stranded. She was shivering, covered in mud and debris, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. She was clutching the remains of a broken wooden beam, trying to hold herself up, but the current was too strong. Without hesitation, Marcus dismounted from his bike and ran toward the structure. His hands were rough, scarred from years of hard labor and combat, but they moved with a surprising gentleness as he reached out to pull the girl from the wreckage. "It's okay, kid," he muttered, his voice low and calming despite the chaos around them. The girl looked up at him, eyes filled with both fear and a flicker of hope. She tried to speak, but the words were lost in the pounding rain. She was too scared to trust him fully, but there was something about the way he moved, his calm presence amidst the storm, that made her hold on. Marcus carefully lifted her in his arms, cradling her with surprising tenderness for someone with his hardened reputation. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." The girl didn't respond, but her small hands, trembling and cold, gripped his jacket tightly. It was in that moment, as he held her, that Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of something he thought had long been extinguished: hope. His mind flashed back to his younger days, when he used to have dreams of a family, a life beyond the endless violence and chaos of the road. But those dreams had been buried deep beneath the weight of his past decisions, the betrayals, and the battles. Now, holding this little girl, something inside him began to shift. He didn't know how or why, but he knew this moment was different. The storm was picking up, the winds howling even louder, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He carried the girl to his bike, his heart pounding not from the cold or the rain, but from the realization that, in this moment, he was no longer just a biker. He was someone who could protect, who could help. He didn't know who this little girl was, or why she had been left to face this alone, but he knew he couldn't let her go. Not now. Not ever again. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was the beginning of something new for Marcus Steel Thompson. Marcus Steel Thompson rode through the rain, his motorcycle engine growling beneath him as he sped toward the small-town hospital. The little girl clung to him tightly, her hands cold and trembling against his leather jacket. Despite the storm, despite the fear that had been overwhelming her just moments ago, there was a quiet stillness about her now. She had stopped crying, her face pressed against his back, her small form shaking not just from the cold but from something deeper, something that Marcus couldn't quite understand. He glanced back at her, his heart twisting in his chest as he tried to focus on the road. It had been years since he'd felt anything like this, protective, instinctive, the urge to keep someone safe at all costs. When he pulled into the hospital parking lot, he parked the bike in front of the emergency entrance. A nurse rushed out, followed by a doctor who was already preparing a stretcher. The moment Marcus stopped the bike, they were at his side, helping him lift the girl off the motorcycle. The nurse spoke to him with practiced calmness, her eyes focused entirely on the girl. We need to get her inside now? Is she conscious? Marcus shook his head, his voice rough from the cold wind. She's been through a lot, but she's alive. I don't know much else. The doctor gave him a curt nod, and the team rushed the girl into the hospital. Marcus stood frozen, watching them wheel her inside. He didn't move for a few moments. He wasn't sure what was pulling him back, what had him standing in the rain when he should have been long gone. Something had changed inside him. As a Hells Angels biker, Marcus had lived by a different set of rules. He had been taught to protect himself, to fight without mercy, to never show weakness. He had long buried any notions of caring about anyone, least of all a helpless little girl. Yet, here he was, standing in the pouring rain, feeling the weight of his past decisions and the strange flicker of hope that had been reignited inside him. He remembered the words the girl had whispered in his ear before she passed out, words that had haunted him since. Please don't leave me. They rang in his mind, a constant reminder of what had happened to him in the past, of how people had abandoned him when he needed them the most. But the girl, she hadn't given up on him. She had trusted him. It was more than he had ever trusted anyone. He finally took a deep breath and moved toward the hospital doors, entering just as the nurse came out, her expression serious. She's stable for now, she said, but she's in bad shape. You should sit down. Marcus nodded, following her to a small waiting area. He didn't sit. He couldn't. His mind raced as he thought about everything that had led up to this moment, everything that had brought him here. Is she going to be okay? He asked. His voice surprisingly calm, despite the storm of emotions that were battling for control inside him. She'll need surgery, the nurse explained. Her leg is broken, and she's had some serious trauma, but with the right care, she should be all right. Marcus felt a wave of relief crash over him. She was going to make it. But what did that mean for him? For the life he had been living? For the world he had built around him? A world of coldness and distance. He thought about his past, how he had shut everyone out, how he had believed that people like him, people in his world, were destined to be alone. But that little girl, she had brought him back to life, somehow. He was a Hells Angels biker. He wasn't supposed to care. But right now, he couldn't ignore the stirring inside him, the shift that had taken place in his heart. She had reminded him of something he thought he had lost forever. The nurse returned, interrupting his thoughts. You can see her now, she said gently. Marcus followed her down the hallway to a small room at the end. There, lying in the bed, was the little girl. She was hooked up to an IV, her small face pale and bruised, but she was alive. He stepped inside quietly, trying not to disturb her. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her sleep. She looked so fragile, so small. And yet, somehow, she had reminded him that there was more to life than the hardened shell he had built around himself. She had awakened something inside him, a spark of hope. The nurse smiled kindly and said, She's going to need someone to stay with her, someone she can trust. She's had a rough time, and the trauma is more than just physical. I'll leave you two alone for a while. Marcus nodded, stepping closer to the bed. He wasn't sure what to do, how to be the protector this little girl needed. He was a biker, not a hero. But as he looked down at her, he felt the pull to stay, to make sure she was okay. He gently placed his hand on her tiny hand, his rough fingers barely able to encircle her delicate ones. You're safe now, he whispered softly. The little girl stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at him, confused. At first, but then something in her eyes softened. Are you real? She whispered hoarsely. Marcus smiled, the first real smile he had felt in a long time. I'm real. And I'm here to make sure nothing bad happens to you again. For the first time in years, Marcus Steel Thompson felt like he had a purpose. Marcus sat beside the little girl's bed, his hands clasped together tightly. The sterile hospital room was silent except for the occasional beep of the monitor. The storm had finally passed, but inside, a storm of emotions raged within him. He had never been one to show weakness, to let anyone get close enough to hurt him. The Hells Angels had been his family, his only family, for years. They had taught him to be tough, to never let his guard down. But the girl, the fragile child he had pulled from the wreckage, had broken down walls he didn't even know he had. She had forced him to confront a side of himself he had long buried. As he watched her sleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had promised her she was safe, But as the hours passed, Marcus realized he wasn't sure if he was safe either. His mind kept returning to the past, to the things he had done and the people he had hurt. The gang had made him into a man he no longer recognized, a man who could look into the eyes of another and feel nothing. But the little girl, she had seen something in him that no one else had. A protector, a man worth saving. It was hard for Marcus to accept that he could be more than just a biker, more than just a man hardened by violence. But she had reminded him of the part of himself he thought he had lost. When the nurse came in to check on the girl, Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of the promise he had made to her. She was going to be okay, but he wasn't sure if he was. He wasn't sure if he could be the man she needed him to be. "How is she?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse, though he didn't know why. The nurse looked at him with a soft smile. "She's stable, but she's going to need a few more days to recover. Her leg is broken, and she's dehydrated. But all things considered, she's doing better than we expected. You've done good, sir." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "She's a tough one," he said quietly, almost to himself. The nurse gave him a curious look, but didn't press. "You can sit with her as long as you'd like," she said before leaving the room. Marcus sat back down, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't keep running, not anymore. He had promised her he would stay, but could he really be the one to take care of her? He wasn't a hero. He was a biker, a man with blood on his hands. The sound of a soft cough brought him back to the present. The girl was awake, her big eyes slowly opening. She looked at him for a moment, blinking in confusion. Then, her lips parted, and she whispered, "Are you really here?" Marcus nodded, leaning forward slightly. "I'm here," he said softly, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "I won't leave you." She nodded slowly, then winced as she shifted in the bed, her small face scrunching in pain. Marcus felt a pang of guilt. She had been through so much, and now she was stuck here, relying on him. It wasn't just her body that needed healing, it was her heart. She had been abandoned, left alone in a dangerous situation. And now, she had found him. But he wasn't sure he could be the person she needed. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently, needing to break the silence, needing to feel some connection to this girl who had so easily found her way into his heart. "Emma," she whispered, her voice faint. "Emma, huh? That's a nice name." She gave him a faint smile, but it quickly faded as she shifted uncomfortably. Marcus stood up, looking around the room. "I'll get you something to drink," he said, his voice quieter now. "You must be thirsty." He walked to the small table by the window and poured water from a plastic bottle into a cup. He brought it back to her, offering it gently. She drank slowly, her hands shaking slightly as she held the cup. As she finished, she looked up at him with those big brown eyes. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus didn't know how to answer. "Because I promised you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised you I wouldn't leave." She seemed to process his words, then nodded slowly. "I remember," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't know how to keep the walls up. He wasn't supposed to care about anyone, especially not a little girl who had been through so much. But here he was, sitting beside her, trying to figure out how to fix the broken parts of both their lives. "You're gonna be okay," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. She smiled again, her small hand reaching out to grab his. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Good," he said quietly. "You don't have to be." But as he sat there, holding her hand, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. The following days were a blur of routine and small miracles. Marcus Steel Thompson stayed by Emma's side, never leaving the hospital for more than a few hours at a time. Every time she woke up, his first words to her were always the same. "You're gonna be okay." He didn't know why he kept saying it. Maybe because he needed to believe it himself. Emma's recovery was slow but steady. Her leg, though badly fractured, was healing. The bruises on her arms began to fade, but the fear in her eyes, the remnants of whatever had happened before he found her, lingered. It was a silent reminder that the road ahead was not going to be easy. And Marcus, despite all his strength and experience, didn't have all the answers. He had always been a fighter, but this was different. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself returning to the hospital each morning, bringing her breakfast and staying until visiting hours ended. The bond between them had grown stronger with every conversation, every moment spent together. Emma would tell him about her favorite books, the ones she read in the old, quiet library at her grandmother's house. Marcus listened, fascinated by the way her young mind worked. She was smart, more than he had expected, and surprisingly resilient for someone who had been through so much. One afternoon, as Marcus sat beside her, the hospital door opened and a woman walked in. She was older, with kind eyes and a tired smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly, her gaze shifting between Marcus and Emma. "I'm Sarah's grandmother." Marcus stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his jacket, as if ready for a fight. But the woman didn't seem threatening. She was just worried. "How is she?" Sarah's grandmother asked, sitting down beside Emma's bed. Emma's face lit up when she saw her grandmother, but there was a hesitation, a moment of uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm okay, Grandma," she whispered, her voice weak but comforting. "I'm safe now." Sarah's grandmother reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're always safe with me, Emma. I'll make sure of it." Marcus stood silently, watching the exchange. It was clear that Sarah's grandmother loved Emma deeply, but there was something in the way Emma looked at her, a guardedness, as if she was unsure of where she truly belonged. After a few moments of quiet conversation, Sarah's grandmother looked up at Marcus. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice sincere. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found her." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said gruffly. I just couldn't leave her." Sarah's grandmother studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're a good man," she said, her voice steady. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. He had never thought of himself as a good man. He was a biker, a warrior, a man who lived by a code that had little to do with kindness. But standing there, listening to Sarah's grandmother speak, something stirred inside him. "I don't know about that," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But I'll do right by her." Sarah's grandmother smiled softly, then turned her attention back to Emma. "You've done more than enough," she said, her tone warm. As the days passed, Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. He had never imagined his life would lead him to this point, caring for a child, standing up for someone other than himself. But here he was, and he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away. The Hell's Angels had taught him many lessons, but this was something entirely new. Protecting Emma, making sure she grew up safe. That was his mission now. Emma continued to recover, and Marcus continued to stay by her side, watching as her spark of life slowly returned. The fear in her eyes began to fade, replaced by curiosity and warmth. She asked him more questions about his life, about his time on the road, and he found himself telling her stories he had long buried. Stories of places he had been, of people he had known, of a life filled with both triumph and regret. But he didn't mind telling her. She listened, her wide eyes full of wonder, never judging, never asking for anything in return. The connection between them deepened, and Marcus began to realize that this little girl, this tiny force of nature, had already changed his life. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about finding redemption in a place he never thought he'd find it. As the weeks went on, the bond between Marcus and Emma became unbreakable. She was no longer just a child in need of help. She had become his reason to keep going, his reason to believe that there was more to life than the road. One night, as Marcus sat by her bedside, Emma turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "Will you stay with me?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. He hadn't expected the question, but he knew the answer instantly. "I'll stay with you," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Emma smiled, a real smile this time, the kind of smile that told him everything he needed to know. She had found the hope she had lost, and in doing so, she had given him back the hope he had thought was gone forever. The days that followed felt like a mix of routine and transformation for Marcus Steel Thompson. He continued his vigil by Emma's side, staying with her through every moment of recovery. The room they shared at the hospital had become their space, a place of safety amidst the chaos of the outside world. Emma's leg was healing, but the emotional scars from whatever had happened before he found her were not so easy to heal. Marcus noticed how she flinched whenever someone touched her arm too roughly, how her eyes would dart nervously at the sound of raised voices. It was clear that the damage done to her went far deeper than just physical pain. Marcus found himself thinking about her constantly. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about helping her find a way to trust again, helping her rediscover a piece of herself that had been lost. But as much as he wanted to help her, he knew he couldn't do it alone. He wasn't sure how to be the father figure she needed, the protector who could shield her from the world's cruelty. But he was willing to try. Over the course of the next few weeks, Marcus found himself growing more connected to Emma. He spent his days at the hospital and his nights with her at her grandmother's house, a house that, though modest, seemed to offer Emma the safety she needed. Sarah, Emma's grandmother, had welcomed Marcus into her home with warmth and gratitude, though there were still moments of awkwardness. Sarah, having raised Emma after the loss of her parents, was understandably protective, but Marcus could tell she was beginning to see him as a figure of stability in Emma's life. Sarah had her doubts, as any grandmother would, but her understanding deepened when she saw Marcus' consistent presence, his willingness to care for Emma, and his deepening bond with her. He had become a silent part of their family, his presence offering comfort in ways he had never expected. Emma's laughter, though rare at first, slowly began to fill the house. It was like hearing music after years of silence. Her grandmother's gentle care and Marcus' quiet protectiveness allowed Emma to breathe again. She would spend hours telling Marcus about the things she missed most, her favorite books, the warm afternoons she used to spend with her parents, the way her mom would sing to her at night. Marcus listened, absorbing every detail, taking note of what she said and what she didn't. She had lived through so much, yet here she was, sharing fragments of a life that was full of joy before it had been shattered. Marcus had never thought about the possibility of having a family, let alone becoming a father figure. He had always been a loner, his life revolving around the club, the open road, and a world that only understood survival. But as he sat by Emma's side, he realized how much he had missed. For the first time in years, he wanted something more than just the next ride, the next fight. He wanted to be the person who could give Emma a chance at happiness. But that meant confronting his own demons. Marcus knew that he wasn't the man he wanted to be, not yet. The road he had traveled was one of violence, betrayal, and loss. The Hell's Angels had taught him to fight, to protect, and to survive. But they hadn't taught him how to heal, how to be gentle, how to care for someone without the weight of his past clouding every decision. One evening, after a long day, Marcus sat outside the house, watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He thought about the future, about what it would look like with Emma and Sarah. He wasn't sure how long he would stay in the small town, but he knew he couldn't leave them, not now. Not after everything they had been through. Emma needed him, and in a strange way, he needed her too. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus found himself thinking less about the club and more about his life with Emma. He began to focus on rebuilding, not just the house or the garage, but the broken parts of his own life. He wasn't sure how it would all work out, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. Emma's progress was slow but steady. She walked with a limp at first, but each day she grew stronger, more confident. She would smile more often, and Marcus couldn't help but feel proud of her. He had been part of her recovery, not just physically, but emotionally as well. He had watched her go from being a frightened, broken child to a girl who was beginning to see the world through hopeful eyes again. Sarah, too, had changed. She no longer looked at Marcus with suspicion. Instead, she saw the man who had saved her granddaughter, who had given her a chance to heal. They were becoming a family in ways Marcus hadn't thought possible. But there was still work to be done. There was still a long road ahead, one that Marcus wasn't sure he could navigate. But for the first time in a long time, he was willing to try. He was willing to do whatever it took to protect Emma, to help her find the happiness she deserved. The past was a shadow that loomed over him, but for once, it didn't define him. Emma was the future, and he was ready to face it with her by his side. The weeks that followed were a time of rebuilding for both Marcus Steel Thompson and Emma. The small town that had once felt so foreign to him had begun to feel like home. Marcus had grown used to the rhythm of everyday life, morning coffee, long afternoons in the garage, and evenings spent with Emma and Sarah. It wasn't the life he had imagined for himself, but it was becoming one he couldn't imagine living without. Emma's recovery had been remarkable. Her leg was healing, and the doctors were optimistic that she would regain full mobility. But more than that, she was healing emotionally. The fear that had once clouded her eyes began to lift. She laughed more often, talked about her future, and started making plans for things she had always wanted to do, like learn how to ride a bike or visit the nearby lake. Her curiosity about the world around her grew with each passing day. It was a sight that Marcus had never expected to see. A child, who had once been so broken, now embracing life with such hope and energy. Sarah, too, had found peace in this new chapter. The small house that had once been filled with the silence of grief was now filled with warmth and laughter. She spent hours tending to the garden in the backyard, something she hadn't had the energy to do in years, and she took great pride in watching Emma grow stronger. The bond between Sarah and Marcus had shifted as well. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared responsibility for Emma's well-being. Sarah had become someone Marcus could rely on, someone who understood that the road ahead wasn't just about physical healing. It was about healing the wounds of the past. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that Marcus received a call. It was from the Hells Angels chapter. His old brothers were asking him to return. They needed him, and the call felt urgent. As Marcus listened to the voice on the other end, he felt a familiar pull in his chest. The life he had left behind was calling him back. The road, the adrenaline, the brotherhood, it was all waiting for him. But as he listened to the request, something inside him shifted. He thought about Emma. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the life they were building together. For the first time, he realized that he didn't need the club to define him. He didn't need the motorcycle life to feel whole. He had something better now, a purpose, a family. The call ended, but the weight of the decision lingered. Marcus stood by the window of the small house, watching as the sun began to set behind the hills. The orange light bathed the world in a warm glow, and for a moment, he felt at peace. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away from Emma and Sarah. Not now. Not ever. He walked outside, feeling the cool evening air on his face. Sarah was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, a soft smile on her face. When she saw him, she patted the seat beside her. "You look like you have something on your mind," she said, her voice gentle. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then sat down beside her. "I got a call," he said quietly. "From the club." Sarah didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded, as if she already knew what he was going to say. "They want me back," Marcus continued. "They need me." Sarah turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. "And what do you want?" she asked, her voice full of quiet wisdom. Marcus took a deep breath, the weight of the decision settling in his chest. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I used to think that was all I needed, being part of something bigger. But now I don't know." Sarah smiled, a knowing smile that reached her eyes. "You've already found something bigger, Marcus," she said softly. "You've found a family." Marcus looked at her, the words sinking in. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the darkness that had defined him. But in Emma and Sarah, he had found light. He had found the future he never thought he'd have. "I don't think I can go back," he said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. She nodded, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to. You've already done enough. You've already made the right choice." The weight that had been pressing on his chest slowly lifted, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt the burden of his past start to fade. The road had brought him here, to this small town, to this family, and for the first time, he was ready to embrace the life he had found. He didn't need to look over his shoulder anymore. The club could keep its past, but Marcus Steel Thompson had a new future. He stood up, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin. "I'm staying," he said firmly. "For her. For both of you." Sarah smiled, standing up to join him. "We're glad to have you, Marcus," she said softly. "You've already given us more than we could ever ask for." As they stood together, looking out at the horizon, Marcus realized that this was the life he was meant to live. Not on the road, chasing something he could never catch, but here, with the people who mattered most. Emma was going to be okay, and so was he. Marcus Steel Thompson stood at the edge of the porch, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The warmth of the day was fading, replaced by the cool touch of evening air. His hands were clenched around the railing, his thoughts racing. Life had become something he never thought possible, a life filled with responsibility, care, and, oddly enough, peace. It had been months since he made the decision to stay. Months since he had chosen Emma and Sarah over the road, over the Hells Angels. And yet, in the quiet moments, Marcus still wondered if he had made the right choice. The life he had left behind wasn't so easily forgotten. The memories of the club, the rush of the ride, and the adrenaline of the life he had lived for so long still clung to him like the worn leather of his jacket. But then he would hear Emma's laughter from inside the house, see Sarah tending to her garden, and everything felt right again. Marcus had found something that the road could never give him, a family, a place to belong. He had learned that being a protector wasn't just about fighting. It was about showing up when it mattered, about being there for the people who needed you, no matter how difficult the journey might be. "Marcus," Sarah called from behind him, her voice steady and warm. He turned to see her walking up the path, a basket of freshly picked vegetables from the garden in her hands. "Come inside. Dinner's ready." Marcus smiled, nodding as he stepped away from the railing. He hadn't been a man who'd spent much time thinking about the simple things. A home-cooked meal, quiet moments with loved ones. These weren't things he'd ever thought he would have. But here he was, walking into a house that had begun to feel like his own. The sounds of Emma's voice filled the air as he entered. She was sitting at the table, her eyes focused on a book, the kind of book kids her age love to get lost in. She looked up and smiled at him as he entered, her face lighting up with warmth. "Hey, Marcus," she called. "I got through 3 chapters today. I think I'm finally going to finish the whole book." Marcus chuckled, feeling a strange sense of pride. "That's great, Emma. Keep it up." She beamed, returning to her book. He sat down beside Sarah, who was already setting the table. "How's she doing?" he asked quietly, glancing at Emma. Sarah looked at him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "She's getting stronger every day, and I can see it, Marcus. She's starting to feel safe again. You've done more for her than you'll ever know." The weight of her words settled on his chest. He didn't know how he had done it, or even why. He hadn't set out to become a hero. He had just made a choice, one small, simple choice, to stay. And in doing so, he had found something far greater than he had ever expected. Family. The meal was quiet, filled with the comfort of routine. Emma talked excitedly about her progress in the book, asking Marcus questions about the places she had read about, her curiosity shining through. Sarah joined in, offering bits of wisdom from her own life, and Marcus found himself participating in a conversation that, just months ago, he would have dismissed as trivial. But now it was everything. After dinner, they all moved to the porch, the cool night air wrapping around them as they sat in silence, watching the stars appear in the sky above. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the night. Life on the road had never offered this kind of quiet. It had never given him a place where he could truly be himself, without the weight of his past hanging over him. He had spent so many years running, never looking back, never allowing anyone to get too close. But now, with Emma and Sarah, he realized that running away had been his greatest mistake. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about something." He turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, then spoke again. "I know this life isn't exactly what you were expecting, and I know the club called you back. But I just want you to know, you're not alone here. Emma and we're here for you, just as much as you've been here for us." Her words were simple, but they struck him deeply. It wasn't just about Emma needing him. It was about Sarah needing him too. He wasn't the only one in this small family who had found healing. Sarah had lost so much, and now she was learning to trust again, to allow someone into her life after years of solitude. And Emma had shown them both that healing wasn't just about time. It was about connection, about love. "I don't know what the future holds," Marcus said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I do know one thing. I'm staying. For both of you." The weight of his own words settled in, and for the first time in his life, Marcus didn't feel the urge to keep moving. The future was here, and it was with them. The Hells Angels might have been his past, but they didn't define him anymore. He had a new family now, and he wasn't going anywhere. The stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter that night, as if the world itself was giving him a sign. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days turned into weeks, and the small town that had once been so foreign to Marcus Steel Thompson had slowly become a place of comfort, a place where he could breathe without the weight of his past pulling him down. He had never imagined that this life, this quiet existence, could become his reality. The road had always called to him, the engine's roar, the endless miles, but now, with Emma and Sarah, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Emma's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Her leg had healed faster than the doctors had predicted, and her once trembling hands had found steady strength. The fear that had once haunted her eyes began to fade, replaced by a new sense of hope. She started attending school again, something Marcus hadn't thought possible just months ago. He watched her, standing at the edge of the schoolyard, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she made new friends. Sarah had taken on the role of guardian with a quiet strength, providing Emma with the love and guidance she had been deprived of. And Marcus, despite his rough edges, had found a way to step into the role of protector in a way he hadn't thought he was capable of. He no longer woke up every morning feeling like he was running from something. Instead, he woke up with purpose, knowing that Emma needed him, and he was more than willing to give everything he had to protect her. One evening, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, Emma looked up from her plate, her eyes shining with excitement. "Marcus," she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. "I have an idea." Marcus looked up from his meal, intrigued by the sparkle in her eyes. "What's your idea, kiddo?" he asked, setting his fork down. "I want us to go on a road trip," she exclaimed. Sarah chuckled softly, shaking her head. "A road trip, huh? Where to?" Emma grinned. "To the lake. I've never been there, and I want to see it. It's supposed to be beautiful. We can pack a picnic and make it a big adventure." Marcus leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. The thought of getting back on the road, of leaving the town behind, stirred something inside him. He hadn't been on a road trip in years, hadn't felt the wind in his hair or the hum of the bike beneath him in far too long. But this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about Emma and Sarah. It was about creating new memories, about showing them the world outside their small town. "What do you think, Sarah?" Marcus asked, looking over at her. She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "I think it sounds like a wonderful idea," she said. "Emma's been through so much, and she deserves a little adventure." "We all do." Marcus stood up, a smile tugging at his lips. "All right, kid. Looks like we're going on a road trip." Emma's face lit up with excitement, and she jumped out of her seat, running to hug him. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her voice full of joy. "This is going to be so much fun." The next few days were spent preparing for the trip. Marcus checked the bike, making sure it was in perfect condition, ready for the long ride. Sarah packed a picnic basket with sandwiches, fruits, and drinks. Emma made sure to bring her favorite books and a journal to document the adventure. As the day of the trip approached, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about the road or the journey. It was about the people beside him. It was about showing them the beauty of the world, 1 mile at a time. The day of the trip arrived, and they set off early in the morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The road stretched out before them, endless and inviting. Emma sat behind Marcus on the bike, her arms wrapped tightly around him, her face pressed against his back. Sarah followed behind in the car, the picnic basket sitting on the passenger seat, ready for the stop they would make along the way. As they rode, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom he hadn't known in a long time. The wind whipped through his hair, the world speeding by in a blur of colors and sounds. For a moment, he felt like the old Marcus, the one who had lived for the ride, for the thrill of the open road. But as he looked in the rearview mirror and saw Sarah's car, with Emma waving from the back seat, he realized that this was different. This was home. This was family. The lake was just as beautiful as Emma had imagined. The sun sparkled off the water, and the trees surrounding the area were lush and green. They set up a picnic by the water, laughing and talking as they ate. Emma and Sarah went for a swim, their laughter ringing through the air, while Marcus sat on the shore, watching them with a content smile. It was moments like this that made him realize how far he had come. He had gone from a life of loneliness and chaos to this, a life filled with love, laughter, and belonging. As the day drew to a close, and the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Marcus sat by the fire they had built, watching the flames dance. Emma and Sarah were nearby, talking about their favorite parts of the day. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had felt this at peace. The future was uncertain, and the past still weighed on him, but for the first time in a long time, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The road had brought him here, and now, with Emma and Sarah, he was finally home. The weeks that followed their road trip were filled with a new sense of normalcy for Marcus, Emma, and Sarah. They had returned from the lake, their hearts full of the memories they had created, and it felt as if everything in their lives had shifted just a little bit. Marcus had never known what it felt like to have a home, to have a family, but now, each day felt like a new beginning. He had become someone he never thought he could be, a protector, a father figure, and, for the first time in his life, part of something he wasn't willing to walk away from. But as much as things had changed, Marcus couldn't help but feel that there was a storm on the horizon. There were still pieces of his past that hadn't been fully dealt with, and though he had found peace in his new life, he couldn't escape the pull of the road, of the past that still lingered like a shadow behind him. One night, after Emma had gone to bed and Sarah was reading a book in the living room, Marcus found himself standing outside on the porch, looking up at the stars. The familiar longing to get back on the bike, to feel the wind in his face, hit him hard. It was the call of freedom, of independence, of the life he had lived for so long. But this time, the pull felt different. It wasn't the desperate need to run away from something. It was a desire to prove something to himself. He had spent so much of his life in the Hells Angels, fighting, surviving, and running from the pain. But now, here in this small town, he was learning that there was more to life than the constant rush of adrenaline. There was love. There was family. There was hope. As he stood there, his mind racing, he heard the creak of the door behind him. Sarah had come outside, her quiet footsteps making no sound on the porch as she joined him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Marcus didn't respond right away, his eyes still focused on the sky. He could feel her gaze on him, waiting for an answer. He took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. "I'm just thinking," he said finally, his voice low. "About what?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. "About the past. About the road. About whether I've really left it behind or if it's still there, waiting for me to go back." Sarah didn't say anything at first, just stood beside him, letting him process his thoughts. After a few moments, she spoke. "Marcus, you've already left it behind," she said, her voice steady. "You're here, with us. You've chosen this. And no matter how hard it might get, this is your life now. You don't have to go back to that world." He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if I'm enough. I mean, you, Emma. You both deserve someone better, someone who hasn't been through all the things I've done." Sarah took a deep breath, her expression softening. "Marcus, you've done more for Emma than you realize. You've given her a chance at a future she never thought she'd have. And as for me, I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for real. And you're real, Marcus." He looked away, his gaze drifting back to the stars. "I'm not sure I can ever really be whole. Not after everything." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Nobody is whole, Marcus. But we can still build something good, something worth fighting for. And you have. You've built a life with us. You've become the man we need." Her words hit him hard. He had never thought of it like that. He had always seen himself as broken, as a man who was too far gone to ever be part of something like this. But maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. "I'm not sure I'm ready for everything that comes with this," Marcus admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to try. For you. For Emma." Sarah smiled softly. "That's all we need." The next morning, as the sun rose over the small town, Marcus felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for so long. The road would always be a part of him. It was in his blood, his soul. But now, he had a new road to travel, a road that led him to Emma, to Sarah, to a future he never imagined. He had been afraid of change, of what it would mean to give up his old life. But now, as he stood in the sunlight, watching Emma and Sarah prepare for the day, he knew that this was his real journey. The road would always call to him, but the family he had found here was something he couldn't walk away from. Not now. Not ever. As Marcus watched Emma race across the yard, laughing as she played, he realized that he had already found the peace he had been searching for. It wasn't in the roar of a motorcycle or in the thrill of the chase. It was in the quiet moments, in the love that had been given to him so freely. And for the first time in his life, Marcus Steel Thompson knew exactly where he was meant to be. Life in the small town had settled into a peaceful rhythm for Marcus, Emma, and Sarah. The mornings were filled with the scent of fresh coffee brewing, the afternoons spent enjoying simple pleasures, gardening, reading, or taking walks through the quiet streets. It was a life Marcus had never imagined for himself, but one he had come to cherish more than he ever thought possible. But even in this peace, there was an underlying tension that Marcus couldn't ignore. The pull of his past, the call of the open road, still lingered in the back of his mind. It was something he had learned to suppress, but it was always there, a shadow waiting to cast its darkness on his new life. One evening, as Marcus sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a familiar rumble filled the air. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The sound of motorcycles approaching brought a rush of memories of the club, of the brotherhood that had once defined him. The bike slowed as they pulled into the driveway, and Marcus stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah and Emma were inside, unaware of the visitors. Marcus knew what this meant. He had seen enough to know when the past was calling him back. The men who stepped off their bikes were familiar faces, old brothers from the Hells Angels chapter he had left behind. They were there to bring him back, to remind him of the life he had walked away from. "Marcus," one of them called, his voice heavy with expectation. "It's been a while, brother. We need you back. Things aren't the same without you." Marcus stood there, frozen for a moment. His old life, the life he had left behind, was standing in front of him, asking him to return. For a second, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the temptation to throw his leg over the bike and ride away, to reclaim the life that had once defined him. But as he looked around, his eyes falling on the house behind him, on Sarah and Emma, he knew that wasn't who he was anymore. He wasn't that man. Not anymore. "I'm not going back," Marcus said, his voice steady, though there was a storm brewing inside him. "I've got something better now. I've got a family." The men exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. "You're making a mistake, Marcus," another one said, his tone more forceful. "You can't run from who you are. This life, it's in your blood. It's where you belong." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their words, but also feeling the strength of the decision he had made. "No," he said firmly. "I don't belong there anymore. I belong here. With them." He gestured toward the house, toward the life he had built. "You're wrong," the first man said, his voice low and dangerous. "You can't just walk away from the club, Marcus. It doesn't work like that. You know what we'll do if you turn your back on us." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood his ground. "You can try, but I'm not afraid of you anymore," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. The men stared at him for a moment, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, without another word, they turned and walked back to their bikes. Marcus watched them ride off, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. His heart was still racing, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of freedom. He had made his choice, and as he turned and walked back into the house, he knew it was the right one. Sarah and Emma were sitting at the kitchen table, talking quietly. They looked up as he entered, their expressions filled with curiosity. "Who was that?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. "Old friends," he said, his voice low. "They wanted me to come back, but I told them no." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if she understood more than he had said. Emma, her face full of innocence, asked, "Are you okay, Marcus?" He smiled at her, his heart swelling with affection. "Yeah, kid. I'm okay." He sat down at the table, the weight of the world suddenly feeling a little lighter. Sarah joined him, her hand resting on his arm. "You've made the right choice," she said quietly. "We're proud of you, Marcus." "I'm proud of you." Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had come so far, from a man who had once believed he was too broken to be part of anything real, to someone who had found love and acceptance. Emma reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his. "We're glad you're here, Marcus," she said softly. "We're a family now." Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had always been afraid that his past would define him, that he could never escape the man he had been. But in that moment, as he looked at the two people who had come to mean everything to him, he knew that his past no longer had control over him. He had found a new life, a new purpose. And this time, he was staying. For Emma. For Sarah. For himself. The future was still uncertain, But Marcus had found a new path. A path that didn't lead back to the road he had known, but forward to a life he had never imagined. And he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The next few months brought an unexpected sense of stability for Marcus, Emma, and Sarah. Marcus had found peace in ways he never thought possible, especially after the turbulent years spent in the Hells Angels. He had fully embraced his new role, not just as a protector, but as a father figure, a role he had never envisioned for himself. Emma had thrived in the quiet environment they had built together, her laughter filling the house every day as she grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. Her leg had fully healed, but more importantly, the walls she had built around her heart were coming down slowly but surely. Marcus had seen her open up, trust again, and it made him proud. He had no idea how much he could love someone until Emma had walked into his life. Sarah, too, had blossomed in this new chapter. Her days were no longer consumed by worry or sorrow. She found joy in simple tasks, in nurturing both the garden and her family. The life they had now was so different from the one they had before, and it was more than enough for them. But as much as Marcus had changed, as much as he had found his place in this small town, there were still whispers of the past he couldn't shake. One afternoon, as Marcus was working on a motorcycle in the garage, he received an unexpected phone call. It was a number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Marcus," the voice said, low and gravelly. "It's time." Marcus' hand froze on the wrench, his heart skipping a beat. It was the voice of his former leader, someone he had never thought he'd hear from again. The call was brief, only enough to let him know that the Hells Angels wanted him back, urgently. They had a job for him, one that required his skills. Marcus felt his pulse race. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The life he had left behind was calling him back. The road, the thrill, and the brotherhood that had once been his family were now within reach again. The temptation was undeniable. But as the adrenaline surged through him, so did the realization that this wasn't just about him anymore. He wasn't the same man who had walked away from the club months ago. He had responsibilities now. He had a family to protect, and the thought of returning to that life felt foreign. He stared at the phone for a long time, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. After a few moments, he hung up. His mind raced as he walked outside to the porch. The wind had picked up, and the sky was overcast, a storm seemingly brewing in the distance. Sarah was sitting on the porch, her knitting in her lap. She looked up when she saw him, noticing the change in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked gently, sensing the tension in his body. Marcus took a deep breath, sitting down beside her. "The club called me," he said quietly. Sarah didn't need to ask what that meant. She had seen it in him before, the pull of his past, the way it never truly let go. "They want me back," Marcus continued. "They need me for something. They want me to come back." Sarah was silent for a moment, her eyes searching his face. She had known this day might come, had known that his past could always come calling. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. Marcus looked out at the horizon, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. He had built a life here, with Sarah and Emma. He had found a purpose in caring for them, in protecting them. But the road had always been a part of him, a part of his soul that couldn't be erased. He had spent years with the Hells Angels, and that part of him was still alive, still hungry. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I was done with that life, but I can't stop thinking about what they want from me. It feels like there's something I need to prove." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You don't need to prove anything to them. You've already proven everything you need to, Marcus. You've built a life here, with us. That's more than anything they can offer." He met her gaze, her words sinking in. He had built something real here, something he had never thought he deserved. Emma had come to trust him, to depend on him. Sarah had welcomed him into her life and had become more than just a partner. She had become his anchor. He had everything he had ever wanted. And yet, the temptation of his past lingered. The tension inside him grew, and he stood up, walking to the edge of the porch. "I need to think about this," he said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. Sarah nodded. "Take all the time you need. But remember, the road you're on now isn't one you have to walk alone." Marcus felt the weight of her words. He had spent so many years thinking he was alone, that he had to carry the burden of his past by himself. But now he had a choice. He didn't have to go back. He didn't have to let the past control him anymore. The decision was his, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to run. He could stay. He could fight for the life he had now. As the storm clouds gathered in the sky, Marcus made his decision. The Hell's Angels could call him, but he was done answering. He had already found his family, and nothing, not the road, not the past, could take that away from him. Marcus woke up early the next morning, the soft light of dawn slipping through the blinds. The decision he had made the previous evening still weighed heavily on him, but a sense of clarity was slowly replacing the uncertainty that had clouded his mind for so long. He had made a promise to Sarah, to Emma, and to himself. The road, the life he had left behind, was no longer his future. He had a family now, something real, something worth fighting for. Emma was still asleep in her room, her soft breaths barely audible from the hallway. Marcus stood quietly, watching her for a moment before walking out to the kitchen. Sarah was already up, making coffee, the familiar sound of the percolator filling the air. She turned to greet him with a smile as he entered. "Morning," she said, her voice gentle, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. Marcus nodded, still feeling the weight of the night's decision. He didn't have the words yet, but he felt a deep sense of peace in his chest. "Morning," he replied. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The warmth of the cup grounded him, as did the simple routine of this new life. It was everything he had wanted, everything he had never thought possible. "So, what's next for us?" Marcus asked, his voice breaking the silence between them. Sarah looked at him, her expression soft but knowing. "You already know the answer," she said. "We keep moving forward. Together." She placed a hand on his, her touch warm and steady. "You've made the right choice, Marcus. I'm proud of you." He looked up at her, meeting her eyes. For a long time, he hadn't believed he could be proud of himself. But now, sitting here with Sarah, with Emma, he finally understood what it meant to build something that truly mattered. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and he was doing it with people who cared about him. They spent the morning together, enjoying the simple pleasures of being in each other's company. They talked about plans for the future, about Emma's dreams, about Sarah's gardening, and even about Marcus' occasional tinkering in the garage. As the day wore on, Marcus realized that he no longer had to keep looking over his shoulder. He had left his past behind. He was free to embrace the future, to be the man his family needed. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself standing outside, staring out at the horizon. The wind had picked up, and the sky was beginning to cloud over. He wasn't sure why, but he felt the need to take a walk. Sarah was inside, finishing up a few chores, and Emma was out with friends, enjoying the freedom she had so long been denied. Marcus walked down the dirt road, his boots crunching beneath him, his thoughts a quiet storm inside his head. He had been part of something once, something that had defined him for so long. The Hell's Angels had given him purpose, but that purpose had come at a cost. He had sacrificed pieces of himself to the road, to the club, and to the violence that came with it. But now, as he walked, he realized that he didn't need that anymore. He didn't need the adrenaline, the thrill of the ride, or the danger that came with being a part of something like that. He had something better now. He had a family, a life filled with meaning and love. The wind began to pick up, the storm in the distance getting closer. Marcus didn't hurry, though. He just kept walking, letting the cool air wash over him, feeling the weight of his past finally lifting. As the clouds rolled in, he felt a sense of finality. The past was behind him. The future was ahead of him. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to face it. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Marcus turned back toward the house, his heart lighter than it had ever been. He had made his choice. The road was no longer his future. Emma and Sarah were his future. And no matter what storm came next, he knew he would face it with them, side by side. When he returned to the house, he found Sarah sitting on the porch, watching the rain begin to pour. Emma had come home, her face flushed with the joy of an afternoon well spent. She ran to him, her arms outstretched. "Marcus, guess what?" she said, her voice full of excitement. "I made a new friend today." Marcus knelt down, a smile tugging at his lips. "That's great, kiddo," he said, his heart swelling with pride. Sarah stood up from the porch swing, walking over to join them. She wrapped an arm around Marcus, her presence grounding him. They stood there for a moment, watching the rain fall. The world around them was changing, but Marcus felt at peace. The past had tried to pull him back, but it no longer had control over him. The future was right here, in front of him, and he was ready to embrace it. For the first time in his life, Marcus Steel Thompson knew exactly where he belonged. He was home. The years passed in a peaceful blur for Marcus, Sarah, and Emma. The house that had once felt like a temporary place to rest had now become a true home. It was filled with laughter, love, and the kind of stability that Marcus never thought he would find. Every day, he woke up with a sense of purpose, knowing that his life had taken a turn for the better. He had left behind the chaos of the road, the violence, the constant tension that had defined him for so long. And now, with Sarah and Emma, he had something real, something he could call his own. Emma had grown into a confident young girl, her smile as bright as ever. She was thriving in school, making friends, and dreaming big. Marcus watched her with a sense of pride, knowing that he had played a part in helping her become the person she was. He had helped heal the broken pieces of her heart, and in the process, he had healed his own. Sarah, too, had blossomed in this new chapter. Her once quiet and cautious demeanor had evolved into one of quiet strength and confidence. She had found joy in the simple things, gardening, cooking, spending time with the family she had built. And for the first time in years, she no longer felt alone. Marcus had become more than just a protector to her. He had become her partner, her equal. Together, they had created something beautiful. But as much as Marcus had settled into this new life, there were still moments when the old world called to him. The occasional motorcycle ride, the brief flicker of memories from his past life, still tugged at his heart. But he had learned to live with it. The road no longer defined him. It was a part of his story, but it wasn't his future. His future was with Sarah and Emma. And as he sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset with Sarah by his side, he knew he had made the right choice. He had left the Hells Angels behind, left the past where it belonged, and had chosen to build a life with the people who mattered most. You know, Sarah said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, I don't think we ever really thanked you. Marcus looked at her, raising an eyebrow. For what? Sarah smiled, her eyes sparkling. For everything. For staying. For choosing us. Marcus felt his heart swell. I didn't really have a choice, he said quietly. I found something here I never thought I would. Something real. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I think we've both found something real, she said. And in that moment, Marcus knew she was right. This wasn't just a chapter in his life. It was the story he was meant to live. They sat there in silence for a while longer, watching the sky turn from golden to pink as the stars began to emerge. It was a perfect evening, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel like he was running from anything. He had come to realize that home wasn't just a place. It was the people you shared it with. And he had finally found his home. Later that night, as they sat around the dinner table, Emma excitedly shared stories from her day at school, telling Marcus and Sarah about her latest project and the friends she had made. She was growing up so fast, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was the life he had always wanted for her. A life filled with love, safety, and the freedom to dream. As the night went on, the family gathered in the living room to watch a movie together. It was a simple evening, but it was everything. Marcus looked at Sarah and Emma, his heart full of gratitude. He had once believed that he was too broken to be part of something like this, but now he knew that he wasn't. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The past no longer haunted him. The future was full of possibilities. And with Sarah and Emma by his side, he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm that had once raged inside him had finally calmed. The road ahead, once full of uncertainty and fear, now stretched out before him like an open highway. But he wasn't in a rush anymore. He didn't need to chase anything. He had already found everything he needed. And as they sat there, laughing and talking, Marcus finally understood what it meant to be truly free. The journey he had taken, the decisions he had made, had led him here, to this moment, to this family. And in that moment, he knew that this was where he was meant to be. Home.